An Inspector Calls. This was a play first written in 1945 by the famous playwright J.B. Priestley. Over the years, many different directors have had their take on the play and won awards for their adaptations. There have been 7 versions since the 27th of March 1950, broadcast on radio. The first of which was on the BBC Home Service. Since then there have been 5 other versions broadcast on the BBC, and the 6th was a CD and MP3 CD release for educational purposes. The most recent version of the play was broadcast on BBC Radio 4 on the 29th of May 2010. It was a 90-minute edition of the play during the Saturday play slot. But why does the play work so well on radio? Well, as far as I can tell, there are 4 key reasons, the first of which being structure. The structure of the play is very simple, as it comes in 3 distinct acts, meaning there aren't many needs for sound effects or extra dialogue to explain scene changes or the start or ends of acts. The second point is setting. The whole play takes place on one single night in April 1912, and it also takes place in one single setting, which is the Behrlings' dining room. Although some characters do enter this room and exit this room, the audience always stays in that room, which means there is no need for any sort of backstage crew in normal theatrical productions, which translates into radio productions. There's no need for added dialogue to explain scene changes or things like that. The third point is characters. In total in the play there are only 8 characters. However, one of those, Eva Smith, is dead from the beginning, so doesn't really count, and another, Edna the maid, is just a prop to show the Behrlings' wealth, so she doesn't really count either. This leaves us with 6 main characters. Of those, only really 2 or 3 are ever in dialogue at once. Due to the inspector's way of doing things, he's very clear, he only interviews one person at a time, and that is very helpful for a radio audience. Obviously, if you're in the theatre watching it, you can see who is speaking, but on the radio that's not the case. You have to listen out for the voices and recognise who is speaking. So by having very few characters, that makes that a lot easier. And the final point is pace. Now the pace of the play is very, very slow, which reflects the inspector's personality of being methodical and sort of, he only does one thing at a time, and that's his way of doing it. And that is good, because not only does it reflect the play and ties in well, it also means that from a radio perspective, the audience can still understand what is a very complex plot. Although the structure is quite simple, the 3-act structure and so on, the actual content of the play and the story is very complicated, so a slow pace means that the audience can still understand easily what's going on.
It's gone. You can't do her any more harm. And you can't do her any good now either. You can't even say, "I'm sorry, Eva Smith."
That's the worst of it.
But just remember this. One Eva Smith has gone. But there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives, with what we think and say and do. We don't live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you, that the time will soon come when, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Good night.
You're the one I blame for this.
I'll bet I am.
Yes, and you don't realise yet all you've done. Most of this is bound to come out. There'll be a public scandal.
Well, I don't care now.
You don't seem to care about anything, but I care. I was almost certain for a knighthood in the next honours list.
Oh, for God's sake! What does it matter now whether they give you a knighthood or not?
It doesn't matter to you. Apparently nothing matters to you, but it may interest you to know that until every penny of that money you stole is repaid, you'll work for nothing. And there's going to be no more of this drinking round the town and picking up women in the palace bar.
I should think not. Eric, I'm absolutely ashamed of you.
Well, I don't blame you. But don't forget I'm ashamed of you as well. Yes, both of you.
Drop that. There's every excuse for what both your mother and I did. It turned out, unfortunately, that's all.
That's all.
Well, what have you to say?
I don't know where to begin.
Then don't begin. Nobody wants you to.
I behaved badly too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of myself. But now you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened.
Nothing much has happened. Haven't I already said there'll be a public scandal? Unless we're lucky. And who here will suffer from that more than I will?
But that's not what I'm talking about. I don't care about that. The point is, you don't seem to have learnt anything.
Didn't I? Well, you're quite wrong there. I learnt plenty tonight. And you don't want me to tell you what I've learnt, I hope. When I look back on tonight, when I think of what I was feeling when the five of us sat down to dinner at that table,